So it now gives me great pleasure to hand the meeting over to George H. from Nobleton, Ontario, who will be sharing for around 50 minutes on the topic, a disease of perception. Thanks, George.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. My name is George, and I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is September the 15th of 1991. And welcome, everybody who are new and who are just starting off. This is a great decision that you've all made, and I commend you for it, because it's not an easy thing to come to Alcoholics Anonymous and live this design for living. It takes a lot of courage, and when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I can't even say I had courage, because I was scared, and I didn't know what was going to happen for me. The title of the theme tonight is Alcoholism, a Disease of Perception. And my late sponsor coined that phrase many years ago. And he also worked in the field as I did at one time. And so I've come to understand that that's a true statement, and I believe that. In our literature, you know, in some place, in one place for sure, on page 104 of the 12 and 12, it says our human tendencies to rationalize have distorted our so-called guidance. So right there's already, you know, he used the word guidance. He didn't use perception. You know, I've come to understand and realize in Alcoholics Anonymous that I'm bodily and mentally different from my fellows. When I put alcohol in my system, I couldn't guarantee what was going to happen to me. I could be at home with the family, with my parents, and having a great time. And I'd drink a little more, and then I would say, I got to go. And then they wouldn't know if I was going to end up in jail that night or dead. I couldn't guarantee what was going to happen to me after I took a drink. Hence the disease of perception. You know, Bill put it very eloquently in the big book. He said, we're Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He describes us, the real alcoholic, as Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. Now, that was written by a Scotsman, that story named Robert Louis Stevens. And that, I have come to believe, was self-autobiographical, because he died of our illness. So when I took a drink, I changed. I don't know about you all, but when I took a drink, I changed from Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde. And, you know, you could even see that if you were drinking with me, you could even see the psychic change that occurred if you were watching me closely after one drink, or even after a half a drink. You could see the change. It's very interesting. When the brain of the alcoholic, under significant amount of stress, pressure, conflict, cannot relieve that, because the brain doesn't relieve that for the alcoholic, what it does is alters its perception of reality. That's why we say in the program, don't get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, because they're distorted, the distortion perceptors. When I get hungry, I can get really angry if I don't eat. If I get angry, I can get lonely. You know, where's everybody tonight? How come nobody's calling me? They're at the meeting tonight, but nobody asked me to come. Right? Push every little self-pity button in me that's possible. And when I'm tired, I can get irritable. I can get short. But very interesting what happens is, and I made up this theory a long time ago. When I get into that state, my brain, under stress and pressure, doesn't see things really the way that they are. That's called illusion, by the way. Our book says on page 30 that we have self-delusion, right? I'm sorry, illusion. We also have delusion, 100 forms of self-delusion. Illusion is seeing things different than they really are. And delusion is believing things different than they really are, which is really a form of psychosis. And it's very interesting when an alcoholic of my description takes a drink, it instantly alters my perception of reality. I actually have the power to induce psychosis in two ways. One, by not taking care of myself and getting too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, or not taking care of resentments, okay, or allowing my defects of character to run me, driven by, right? What did we say in the big book? Driven by 100 forms of fear, 100 forms of self-delusion, 100 forms of self-seeking, and 100 forms of self-pity. That's 400 forms. And then we can have all forms of self-deception. That's on page 31. So right away when that happens for someone like me, I'm not in reality anymore. I'm not seeing things clearly. And if I stay that way long enough, sobriety becomes unbearable, untenable, crappy, whatever word you want to use. Hence, the second part of the first step, where we say we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. We have an allergy to alcohol. Drinking's the problem. And after that, there's a dash, that our lives had become unmanageable because of the obsession of the mind. Sobriety is unbearable. So we have these two things going on here. Drinking being a problem and sobriety being a problem. And that's the bedrock of the first step. And when those two things are active, then I roll into areas of insanity. Now, insanity, as we talk about in the program, it's not the insane things that we did when we were drinking, that the insanity that we're talking about. It's the insane thinking we do when we're stone cold sober to think that we can drink again. That's the insanity of the second step, hence a disease of perception. So how do I get out of this? How can I get out of this area when my perceptions are getting distorted? Well, there's one thing I can do is phone somebody, on a friend, and allow them to impose their clear perceptions on my distorted perceptions. Now that's really working the second step. Because when I can do that, then basically I'm allowing them to adjust the knobs on my TV set, if you will, so the picture becomes clearer. Because I'm in distorted perception. My perceptions aren't clear. So when I can reach out, then I can allow somebody to make them clear for me by taking some actions. They might say, well, George, maybe you need, when I was new here, you need to do an inventory. Go do your 4th step. Maybe now they say, you know what? Why don't you go to a meeting? Why don't you go help somebody? Why don't you go to sleep for a while? See, so I can take an action which will alter the perception back to reality. You see, AA does for us slowly what alcohol did for us fast. It slowly alters our perception of reality. When I drank, it took me out of reality, and I stayed that way for many years. I ended up in jails. I ended up in prisons. I ended up hurting a lot of people. I ended up dead a couple of times and brought back to life. So obviously, the perception was not clear, was not healthy. You know, here's the I can, and my sponsor and I, we talked about different things, more about my behaviors, and he tried to get me to do things that would allow me to become more mature, because we have childlike emotions. But if, for instance, if this ceiling here, the ceiling that I have here is like a off-white. If my sponsor would have said to me, George, this ceiling is black, and I'd say to him, well, Clancy, it's white. He says, I don't care what it looks like to you, George. Just act like it's black. And suddenly I take some actions, and guess what? The ceiling becomes black. A disease of perception. And it's a recovery of getting a psychic change. Remember what Dr. Silkworth said, y'all, in the doctor's opinion of why we drink? In AA, a lot of people, I hear stuff all the time here. Oh, it doesn't matter why you're an alcoholic. You're an alcoholic, and that's all that matters. That's podium talk. Dr. Silkworth tells us exactly why we drank and why we're alcoholic. And he tells us exactly what we have to do. It says men and women drink. Why? Essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems to be the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, the phenomenon of craving develops. They pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over. Now, here it is, folks. And unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's little hope of their recovery. What does that mean? That means they're going to die. That's what that means. He just didn't put that there. He's asking us to use our common sense in a lot of areas when you're reading. But if an alcoholic of my type doesn't experience an entire psychic change, there's little hope of my recovery. If there's little hope of my recovery, what does that mean? If I have a heart attack, God forbid, and there's little hope of my recovery, that means I'm going to die from the heart attack. Or God forbid, I have brain cancer, which I know about because my second wife died of it. Right? And there was no hope of their recovery, of her recovery. Little hope. Oh, let's do some radiation and see what happens. Little hope. And she ended up dying after 10 months. So that's what that means. So alcoholism being a disease of perceptions, my perception has to get altered. First, it got altered by alcohol. Now it has to get altered by recovery. In sobriety, this is my third marriage. I was married twice. Both of my wives passed away. Obviously not at the same time. But my perceptions at that time were very skewed. I was in a lot of grief. Okay? But you all helped me through that. You had me take actions that perhaps I didn't believe in taking at that time, just as you did when I first got here. You had me take actions which I didn't believe in taking, which helped me with altering these perceptions. Get a group, get a sponsor, go to meetings, get active in my group, work the steps, make an inventory, go make the amends. See, very interesting too, in the amends process, that, if you ever have gone through that, anybody here, that also alters perception, doesn't it? You go make amends to somebody that you've harmed, that maybe you feel a lot of guilt towards, and suddenly you make that amend, and suddenly the guilt is gone or dissipates, and the perception starts to change. You see, it's very interesting, actually. In prayer and meditation, excuse me, I've had a lung infection. I've been very ill, so you might hear me cough a little bit here and there. So excuse that. I got some water here, so. In the 11th step, we do inventory on positive things. Bill writes in the big book, in the 11th step, we constructively reviewed our day. That's positive. He talks about, in the 10th step, he talks about looking at 4 things: selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. In the 12 and 12, is a different process altogether. But in looking, in practicing the 11th step, I look at the positive things that I do in my day, from day after day after day after day after day after day, and that changes perception as well. I did a deal many years ago in the United States, and it was called Emotional Sobriety: The Next Frontier, just like the article Bill wrote on. And it was they had I think it was I started on Friday evening, and then Saturday, Sunday, and Saturday, and then finished it on Sunday. And I went through the 12 steps for these people. And there was and also had a couple of speakers too on Friday night. And there was Q&A after I finished on Sunday. And you know what the interesting thing was? There was a lot of sobriety in that room. And people that were seasoned AAs. They were stuck in their sobriety. Do you know why? Because they weren't doing a positive inventory. Some of them were doing a 10 step, were doing inventorying, but it was all negative. We have a negative illness. If our inventories are always negative, then the disease of perception stays negative. My perceptions will stay negative. Hence, if I look in the 11th step and jot down things that are positive in my day, such as, practicing honesty in the day, practicing open-mindedness. These are the principles. Practicing willingness, practicing some courage, practicing some integrity and dignity, practicing some patience and tolerance, practicing some humility, practicing some brotherly love, practicing some forgiveness, practicing some self-restraint, practicing some spiritual awareness. And Dr. Bob said we could put our 12 steps together with 2 words, love and service. In practicing these things and jotting them down, they're very positive. Those are positive virtues, positive principles. So the inventory in the 11th step is very, very important to get clear perception. I remember for the first 4 years of my sobriety, I did inventories. After I did my 4th step and got to the 10th step, I did 10-step written inventories every day. Every day. But you know what started to happen? Self-obsession after 4 years started to come back on the inventorying. And so an old timer told me then, George, why don't you take it easy with a daily inventory, with writing all the time? You're getting self-obsessed. And not too much longer after that, in my 5th year, and some of you people might know a gentleman named Clancy from California. Well, I got him as a sponsor. He just passed away in 2020. We were together for 24 years. And when I got him, he changed it up. He had me doing a written inventory. He called it a letter. I called it an inventory. Once a week. I had to send it to him on Tuesday, and we talked on Wednesday. And if I had resentments or perceptions were distorted, he had me take actions to switch that around, to clear up the perception. You see? Sometimes the inventory was very positive. I worked with others this week, love and service. I practiced love and service. He says, kid, it sounds like you're having a great week. Upward and onward. Talk to you next week. Click. So it didn't have to get into me making up more problems for my mind with negative perception, because it was positive. You see? It was positive. I grew up in a Hungarian home. So part of me is Hungarian and the other part of me is Italian. So one part of me wanted to take a drink, the other part of me wanted to kill somebody. And I grew up with my grandparents. And my grandmother, I love her so much. But my grandmother was very negative in a lot of areas. And my grandmother was one of us. Okay? When she was drinking, it was so great. As when she was sober, it was so hideous. Right? And with her, I could get very, very, very negative. And then I would start to drink, and my negativity could get worse and worse and worse and worse. And then I could get angry, and then I could get even violent. So this type, in the beginning of my recovery, this type of behavior and this type of perception had to change little bit by little bit. I used to call my sponsors in the beginning daily just to check in. Little bit by little bit, my perception started to change. Little bit by little bit. I started to associate with positive people, right? And that was hard sometimes to do in Alcoholics Anonymous, especially when you're new. Because, people can look real good in the meeting for an hour, but it's what you do after whatever you close with, the Lord's Prayer, the Serenity Prayer, whatever, until the next meeting, until the next Serenity Prayer. It's in between that's important what you're doing, right? And so I'd go to meetings and I'd be with people later on, and some of them were positive, and some of them were just not drinking, and they weren't that positive. So my perceptions could change too. Folks, after 104 days of sobriety, I picked up a drink because I was in too much pain. What does our book says? What does our book say? We are in a grip of a progressive illness. We're in a grip of a progressive illness over any considerable period. We get worse, never better. They're talking about when we're sober, not when we're drinking. That's when my disease progresses. And if it progresses in the area, because it's a negative illness that I have, alcoholism, if it progresses in the area where it's nothing but negativity, then that's what I'm going to put out, that spiritual energy of negativity. You see, that's why it's important for me to do prayer and meditation, to do a daily practice, so I can stay positive. So I can do things in the community that are positive. I'll tell you, I got into the addictions field. I was in it for over 20 years. I take a break once in a while, but over 20 years. And then I got out of that. I went into another department of the healthcare system. I became a community health worker. And there, I had to be very, very positive, because I'm dealing with people who are palliative, who are dying. I go and I care for people in their homes. Right now, I got injured at work on the 12th of this month. So I'm doing physio right now. So right now I'm doing modified duty. But very important to be positive at work with these people. And people that even are bedridden, or just people who are elderly, that I have to help them bathe, or whatever the case may be. Have to be positive with them. Can't go in there with negative energy. So I learned that here. See, AA has given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. So to get back to hungry, angry, lonely, and tired, this is what I do when I'm hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. When I'm hungry, I eat. There's a solution. When I'm angry, I try to calm down, get some serenity, do some prayer, call somebody, take it easy. When I'm lonely, I go try to help people. And when I'm tired, I try to rest and sleep. And that's what happens. That's what helps me with halt. But guess what? That's easier said than done. Alcoholics say we like to get things done all in one time. Oh, I got to do this. I got to do that. You know, it says easy does it. Emotions destroy intelligence. However, the intelligence can destroy the emotions as well. I cannot think my way into good living here. I got to live my way into good thinking. I can't think my way into spiritual living here either. I got to live my way into spiritual thinking because it's a disease of perception. When my second wife, I'll share this too. When my second wife was in the hospice, she was dying. And she was in Al-Anon. And, I've come to believe that the fundamental idea of God is in every man, woman, and child. Through things like this, for instance. I just had a funny feeling because she had the death rattle going and the shallow breathing. And I had been with my stepfather when he died. So I'd experienced death. So I said to her, darling, the angels are here. God loves you and I love you. And she took her last breath. And when she took her last breath, I could feel energy coming out of her. Sandy B used to talk about the energy that's within us. My perceptions are clear to that energy. You see, that's what a clear perception gives me as opposed to a distorted perception. See, the energy is clear. So the energy or the God in me can salute the God in you. And hopefully the God in you can salute the God in me. What do you think happened with Bill and Dr. Bob on Mother's Day in Akron? Dr. Bob did not want to go to that meeting. But his wife, Ann, was very persistent. She was a persistent lady. And he got drunk the night before. He went to that meeting with a hangover. And he told Bill, listen, I'm going to give you 15 minutes. And that 15-minute conversation turned into 6 hours or 5 hours. Now, in that conversation, Bill used what we call the nutcracker approach in Alcoholics Anonymous. You don't hear that much anymore. But the nutcracker approach is Bill Wilson gave Dr. Bob what Dr. Silkworth gave Bill Wilson, the nature of his illness, the obsession of the mind coupled with the allergy of the body. And Bill's spirit, Bill's perceptions were clear and were able to transmit that to Dr. Bob. Because Dr. Bob never heard that before. Have y'all ever saw that movie, The Bill W. Story? It's an old movie with James Woods and James Gardner. Do you remember when he tells him that? And you see that? Do you see the look on Dr. Bob's face? Like he's never seen this before. When he says to him this, when he says, Bob, I'm not here for you. I'm here for me. Right? because Dr. Bob says, just what can you do for me? Clergymen have been here, doctors have been here. So what can you do for me? And Bill said, I'm not here for you, I'm here for me. It instantly altered his perception, didn't it? Instantly, a perception was altered. Did somebody just text me from Christine from the host? No? I got something on, anyways. I still got 15 minutes. Okay. So from that meeting, we are here today because some perceptions got changed. One alcoholic talking to another alcoholic to reduce their feelings of my case is different, just enough that they can take actions which they didn't believe in taking. That's the germ of sobriety. That's what we're doing here in England at whatever time it is there. 6 hours behind here. Right? Do you know in this room right now, there is, I don't know, 69 people. Do you know there's more sobriety in this room right now than there was in the world? In the world in 1935. Think about that. How did that happen? Through a loving God, grace of God, people, program, prayer, people carrying the message to each other, helping newcomers, and newcomers helping long-timers, old-timers, people who are ahead of them a couple of years. And it continues to grow and grow because we're speaking the language of the heart here. Wow. The language of the heart. You know, if you're having difficulty and you're sober a while, do yourself a favor. If you have that book, Language of the Heart, I believe it starts. I'm not going to take the book out right now because I got to, I'll take it out right now. I believe it starts on page 230, 233. He starts with, in all our affairs. Read that segment. There's emotional sobriety, the next frontier. There's the 11th step. There's humility for today. There's God as we understand him. There's a matter of fear, a matter of dishonesty. Letters from a letter that Bill wrote Dr. Young, or Dr. Young wrote Bill. Can't remember which one it is. Let me just see here, because I'll tell you. No, acceptance. Yeah, I don't know if, no, it's not in there. But it's in the book. I think it's in the last. Oh, Dr. Young to Dr. Silkworth. Sorry. Carl Young writes to Dr. Silkworth. And later on, I think there's, oh, here it is. I'm sorry, it is there. Bill W., Carl Young letters. It's there on page 276. It's in that segment still. You know what's a very interesting thing talking about perception? So in 1909, 1906, I think it's 1909, they have this big seminar in Clark University in the United States. And guess who is at this seminar for this weekend? Is William James and Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. And Carl Jung is brand new. He's studying under Sigmund Freud. And when Carl Jung meets William James there, if you know anything about William James discovered for human beings in general that in order for them to get a spiritual experience, there had to be a deflation in ego. Okay? And something had to happen to them. Not a lot of people get this experience, but something happens to them. The brain changes, but a deflation must occur. Now I'm sure that he explains this to Carl Jung because later on, Carl Jung says the same thing to Roland Hazard. When Roland Hazard goes to, because Roland Hazard's family sent Roland to go see Carl Jung circa 1932, I believe, because he was a drunkard. And perceptions were all over the place. And he goes to see Carl Jung, and he's in laboratory conditions with Carl Jung for 1 year. That's a long time to be like an experimental human being, and Carl Jung's writing down his findings of him. Okay? Then he lets him go after a year. And Roland gets on a plane and stops off in Paris to visit some friends. Huh? Thinking that the perception is clear now, eh? And suddenly, one of his friends asks him the wrong question. Roland, do you want a drink? Oh, yeah, sure, why not? He takes a drink, and they find him under a bridge. After 1 year, alcohol wasn't his problem, was it? The disease of alcoholism was their problem. His problem. Sobriety was his problem. There was no treatment. So where does he go? He's getting on a plane, going right back to Dr. Jung. Now, Dr. Jung does something there that, folks, if he didn't do that, I don't think we're on this Zoom meeting right now. He says this to Roland: I misdiagnosed your condition. You're what they call an alcoholic. And for you, at this present moment in medical science, in medicine, there's no cure for your illness. Only a spiritual experience can cure you. Can you imagine getting that type of news? Be knocking on people's doors. Excuse me, can I get a spiritual experience here? You know? So he goes back to Vermont. Now, Roland then gets hooked up with the Oxford movement. Okay? And then he gets well there. And he's sober a little period of time. And then he goes to Vermont for a visit. He wants to visit his friend Ebby, who's drinking. Now, Ebby just put a car through a house. So they went to see him. Okay? You think Ebby's perceptions were a little altered there? Puts a car through a house. And when they go to see him, they say to him, listen, why don't you come with us? He says, no, I'm not going. So they leave. Now, folks, here's another dangler you can think about. 2 weeks later, they come back. They leave and they come back. Folks, if they don't come back, you and I may not be sitting at this meeting right now. They come back, and by this time, Ebby, now he's in front of a judge. They're thinking about sentencing him to the penitentiary because he painted his house and a bird crapped on his house. And he opened up on the bird with a shotgun. I don't know if it was sawed off or not. I can't remember. But he opened it up on him with a shotgun. You weren't allowed to do that in Vermont back in those days. And now he's in front of a judge. But Roland's family had a lot of pull, a lot of financial pull. So the judge signed Ebby Thatcher out on their recognizance and gave him to Roland under one condition: he never come back to Vermont. So they took him out of there. Okay? And Ebby got sober. And then one day he's got to do that in the Oxford movement. And what does he knock on? Whose doors does he knock on? Bill Wilson's. And you all know the story. Right? But these are important parts in the disease of perception, how perceptions changed. You know, back in the 1800s, in 1864, they called it the inebriate asylum. It was in New York State. Do you know what they did there, folks? Just to show you how far we have come and what type of treatment we belong to, the most successful treatment for the disease of alcoholism in 7,000 years of recorded history that we're in Alcoholics Anonymous. What they did to people in 1864 in the inebriate asylum was this: men who were alcoholics of our type would get lobotomies. Women who were alcoholics of our description, they would give them sterilization operations so they couldn't bear children. We've come a long way. We've come a long way, folks. So alcoholism to me still is a disease of perception. I try to take care of myself as much as I can. I reach out in sponsorship so my sponsor knows that I'm doing good, or he knows if I'm doing crappy. And I allow my sponsor to impose his clear perceptions on my distorted perceptions, even at 33 years of sobriety. Because I'm a human being with the illness of alcoholism. So I do my third step prayer every day still. Been doing it a long time. 7-step prayer. I ask God to remove some defects, and I won't bore you with the defects, because we're brothers and sisters in our defects. We're brothers and sisters in our. We're not so much brothers and sisters in our virtues. We're brothers and sisters in our defects. right? And I do my 11-step prayer. I ask God, I say, God, please help me die more of self today and yesterday. I do that beautiful prayer that we open with, a set aside prayer. Got that from Zoom. I ask God to help me practice these principles in my affairs, and I've gone through the principles with you. And in closing, I close with this in my meditation. This is how I feel about you all, and I'll pass it on to you now. It goes like this. It's called Thank God for You. Thank God for you, good friend of mine. Seldom is a friendship such as thine. How very much I wish to be as helpful as you have been to me. Of many prayer guests one thou art, on whom I ask God to impart rich blessings from his storehouse rare, and grant to you his gracious care. As I recall from time to time how you have inspired this heart of mine, I find myself inclined to pray, God bless my friend this very day. So often at the throne of grace, there comes the picture of your face. Then instinctively I pray that God may guide you all the way. Someday I hope with you to stand before the throne of God's right hand and say to you at journey's end, praise God, you've been to me a friend. Thank you for my sobriety. And Maya, thank you so much for inviting me to do this today. It's been really great. Thanks a lot.